Brewster here, episode of Chordplay, and this is I Love 50s Chords. And I put together some of these decade kind of chord searches or tributes to certain decades of rock music. We've looked at the 60s and the 70s. I think there's two 80s episodes, a 90s episode, and now we're going to hit the 50s. And the 50s are very cool. Definitely the birth of rock and roll. You got Chuck Berry, you got Elvis, and Buddy Holly, and all these just legends of rock music. But one thing I'm going to definitely set the record straight here, and no offense to the Elvis fans out there, but the first thing I want to claim here, or just basically state, which you don't have to agree with me, but if you're going to watch this video, you have to listen to me. Chuck Berry is the king of rock and roll, period. I've had a lot of people ask me over the years, students and friends, what I consider the first, big electric rock guitar solo. And a lot of people point to Johnny B. Good, the intro. And we were just talking about Chuck Berry, so no offense to that song or Chuck. It's timeless and it's a classic. But about 4 years before Johnny B. Good, Bill Haley released, Rock Around the Clock, what a lot of people consider one of the earliest, rock and roll songs. And in that tune, guitarist Danny Cedrone played a guitar solo. And for 1954, he was literally shredding. He's doing tremolo picking and these chromatic runs, and there's like open string pull-offs and stuff. Very wicked for 1954, very early example of just a rock out, electric guitar solo. So if you haven't heard that in a while, go check out Rock Around the Clock and listen to that solo. It's blazing. Or with the intro, that's Sleepwalk from Santo and Johnny, and that's a very famous, 1950s instrumental song. It's been in a bunch of movies and commercials and a bunch of stuff. But I've always loved this tune. It just has this really kind of sad and somber, sound, but it takes you into this kind of dream world, when you hear it. Love it. So it's basically using a variation of what they call the doo-wop progression, which we're going to be talking about that in just a second. The 1950s doo-wop musical style. It actually has a progression, named after it, the doo-wop progression. And this is a variation of it. So the first thing we're going to look at here is just the basic chord progression, behind the melody. So we've got C major, A minor, and then it's basically F minor, and then G7. So that's going to be a 1, 6, and then a minor 4, and then a major 5. So that's the variation. That's known as the sleepwalk switch, where we're playing a minor 4 chord before it goes to that major 5 chord. So that's the switch, C major, A minor, F minor, to G major. So that's not quite the doo-wop progression. It's the right order of chords, but one of them is modified. The doo-wop progression, which we're going to talk about in a second, that's going to be C major, A minor, F major, to G major. So the only difference is just that minor F, in Sleepwalk, to G. And eventually in Sleepwalk it does kind of rotate. Like sometimes it's F minor, and then sometimes it is F major to G major. So that's the basic progression. In the beginning you're kind of hearing, this. So that's basically A minor right there. But over that first chord, which is C major, he's really just playing, the middle two strings, the D and the G. And that's functioning, for C major. And then you're grabbing this, which is going to function for A minor in there. So there's a little piece of C and a little piece of A minor. And then you're moving back to this, which is going to function for F minor. And then you're going to move up this little partial G. So it's all these little fragments and pieces of chords there for the beginning. And it's actually played on a steel guitar, right? But you can actually hit these harmonics, which kind of mimics that steel guitar slide part right there. It's the 12th fret on the G to the 7th fret on the D, and then 12th fret on the high E to the 12th fret on the B, and then grab the bar for a little vibrato there. And then repeat that little partial, F minor, into G. And then you're going to loop that progression, which I was using the TC Electronic Ditto looper to loop that a second ago. It's a C, A minor, F minor to G, right? As far as the doo-wop progression is concerned, I did devote an entire episode of Chordplay to 1-6-4-5 progressions. You'll have to search around on the channel to find it. But I wanted to hit this again because now we're looking at 50s music. And in Sleepwalk, you know, we had a modified 1-6-4-5, and that was C major, A minor, F minor to G major. But occasionally in that song, you do hear that F minor change to the correct, you know, F major chord. And by correct, I mean, you know, for the doo-wop progression. But if we change, you know, Sleepwalk's Sleepwalk switch progression just to a regular doo-wop, that's going to be C major, A minor, F major to G major. And that's the correct, you know, I guess the correct way of playing a doo-wop progression. Hundreds of songs that follow that progression, you know, 50s music, and then it continues in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even up to today. Check on Wikipedia, just type in 1950s progression and look at that song list, like your jaw's going to hit the floor. Now to modify this progression to include one of the songs I included on that image earlier, and to also help you move this into another key, check out the song All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers, and you'll find this progression in action again. Now we're in the key of E. Basic chords too, E major, C sharp minor, A major, B major, but there's your 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. Now as far as Chuck Berry's concerned, Chuck had a secret chord hiding up his sleeve, and he used this chord during the intro of No Particular Place to Go and the song School Day, and the chord in question is D augmented, which we can find right here. Had some augmented chords pop up in other episodes on this channel, but for the intro of both those songs, No Particular Place to Go and School Day, Chuck is grabbing this chord and banging on it 13 times, like this. One more time. And you could think of that as 4 sets of triplets with 1 extra strum, or just count to 13, but there's the intro of No Particular Place to Go and School Day. And both those songs are in G, you know, once they get going, but the intro is identical, that D augmented chord. And just as a reminder, you know, augmented's when we take a major chord and we raise the 5th. So for D major, to convert that to D augmented, take D major and change A to A sharp, and then you suddenly have augmented, you know, raised 5th, and it's a very interesting sound. And similar to how you can move, you know, diminished chords around in minor thirds or 3 frets, you can do that with augmented chords, but now you have to use major thirds or 4 frets. And when you do that, it almost sounds like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, kind of. But a really interesting sound. Now speaking of Bugs Bunny, check out the intro to the song Blue Jean Bop from Gene Vincent, and you'll hear this huge slide that once again sounds like something from Looney Tunes, like this. You know, really interesting. So right there, it's basically G to G6. A little bit of bar action, then just kind of roll your way or kind of slowly strum through C major. And then right there you've got a G6-9, which is definitely a jazz, you know, jazz approved chord. And then he basically grabs the top part of that and slides an octave higher. And then strum it again with the bar when you get up there. You know, cool sound. Back in the 1950s, if you were somebody cool like Bo Diddley, you could write a song with basically one chord and nobody would care or even say anything. The song revolves around G, the song Bo Diddley by Bo Diddley. And in Bo's defense, it does start flirting with this G-F-G kind of thing. And eventually it does do like the C, D, C, G kind of thing. The exact same song, which I guarantee was inspired by the song Bo Diddley, but Willie and the Hand Jive by Johnny Otis is almost the same thing. Almost the same. It's B flat, and then it does eventually move to E flat, so it does have like a two-chord kind of vamp. Eric Clapton and a whole bunch of people have covered that song, but both of those songs are showing you like, hey, you can keep it really simple as long as you got a good groove and some lyrics. Yeah, you can just play one chord or maybe two if you want to stretch it. So we're approaching the end of this lesson. We do have one more song we're going to look at, but I had to take a second here just to devote a little bit of time to Link Wray. Because Link Wray is one of the most underappreciated, obscure, often forgotten, and overlooked, guitar legends. A pioneer of electric guitar and power chords and distortion and this rock and roll attitude with leather jackets and hair piled high and all that stuff. Link Wray was a badass. All right, the last example is the song Rumble from Link Wray, and this song literally was banned from radio stations. The authorities and parents and all these people were afraid that if teenagers and young people heard this song back in the 50s, they thought they were going to riot in the streets. They thought they were literally going to rumble, when they heard this song. Now, it might seem tame by today's standards, but just think back to the 50s and what they hadn't heard yet, and they hadn't heard something quite like this. Basically, that first chord, think of like distortion, these ringing power chords and stuff. I mean, nobody was playing like that back then. But you've got a D sus2 over A for that first chord, strum that twice, and then just go to a cowboy E major right there. And just a little bit of grit. I had to roll my volume on my guitar way back just to get that kind of gritty, clean tone, because it's almost clean, but it's a little gritty too. And just let those chords ring. And then do that D sus2 over A again, and then go to A major right there. And then back to that D sus2 over A. Back to the E. And then do the D sus2 over A again, and then the last time here, grab a B root note, and then you're going to play the top part of that B7, and then just literally walk down E minor pentatonic in open position like this. And then go back to that D sus2 over A. And you do it all over again. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with I Love 50s Chords. And as I mentioned earlier, the 1950s was a really interesting decade of music. You know, whether you're listening to rock or blues or jazz or country or whatever, there are all these really great, musicians and songs and individuals that popped up during the 1950s. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.